Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the challenges facing public higher education, my special interview with U.S. Senator Bob Casey. But first, a preview of Tuesday's primary. As they say, let's get to it.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Welcome back to the program. Well, joining me is John Micek. He's the editor-in-chief of Pennsylvania Capital Star. He's one of the journalists we frequently have on the program. Good morning, John Micek.
Good morning, Terry. How are you?
Actually, I should say good day because the program airs in various markets at different times, but we'll get to the issue. Tuesday's primary has gotten, I'll put it this way, complicated. Mail-in ballots, changes of primary where people will go to vote. When will we know the results of primary elections? As they say, complicated, very complicated. Take it.
Yeah, Terry, this is a unprecedented election, one unlike we've ever seen before. People already sending in their no-excuse mail-in ballots to their county elections bureaus because they don't want to go down to the polls on Tuesday next to cast their ballots in person, fearing for their safety. Some cities, such as Philadelphia and Allegheny County, who have drastically reduced the number of polling places to minimize the risk to both poll workers and to citizens alike. I mean, I think we saw, Terry, back, long ago, it seems like ancient history, in March, what happened with that special election in Wisconsin, and what a disaster that turned into. And I think that's something that state officials are keeping in mind. Conversations I had as recently as last night indicating that the Department of State is working frantically with county officials to make sure everything functions as smoothly as possibly can be expected on Tuesday.
Yeah. John, the question that keeps coming up is election fraud, 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 fraud. That's a word. But there's not a lot of evidence that there's fraud. There's mistakes that are likely to be made. But overall, I mean, and you can't rule out an incident here or there of election fraud, but by and large, the fundamental problem will be how you handle way more than 1 million. I'm not even going to speculate on the number of people who do the mail-in voting. I might speculate, 1.4, 1.6 million, who knows what it will actually be. And we won't know the results of the election perhaps for days in some cases where there are primary contests.
Yeah, let me take that in two pieces, Terry. Those allegations of fraud came from President Donald Trump, who I might add actually voted absentee from his home in Florida. So good enough for him. His campaign is actually now, in fact, mounting a push to make sure voters have mail-in ballots in advance of the Tuesday primaries. Always important to watch what the president does rather than what he says. To get to the heart of the matter, no, fraud is practically non-existent. The kind of fraud that people worry about, voter impersonation, as well we know, is practically non-existent. So that's really a non-starter. The logistics, though, you have a justifiable concern. If you look at the special elections in Maryland just a few weeks ago for the congressional seat formerly held by Elijah Cummings, it took days before the results were known there. There are some lawmakers in Harrisburg now who are pushing to have the deadline for submitting mail-in ballots pushed to June 9th, the same deadline given to military overseas voters because of just this flood of results that are coming in. It'll be a long night on election night, but I doubt very seriously that we're going to know who won a lot of these contests when everyone finally goes to bed.
And one of the big concerns, John, has to do with, if you have voting in these relatively cramped and small facilities, you've got a lot of elderly people who've said that they're not going to show up because, some of them have pre-existing conditions, and it presented a major challenge for election officials in the counties across our state.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I said a moment ago. I mean, some counties are reducing the number of polling places for that very reason. State officials are trying as best they can to encourage as many people as possible to send in mail-in ballots. It would have been a wiser move to send applications to everybody statewide, like they did, I think, in Michigan and some other states. But here we find ourselves. It's an incredible concern. A lot of and it's not to put a finer point on it, a lot of the people who volunteer at the polls are retirees. They're concerned about their safety. They are concerned about their health. And from what I can see, state officials are making a good faith effort to try to minimize any exposure or any risk.
Well, John, I want to thank you for coming on the program as always, and please stay safe.
Thanks. You too, Terry.
All right, coming up, U.S. Senator Bob Casey. Boy, do we have some important subjects to talk to him about. We'll see you in a moment.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association and Partners for Public Education, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, joining me now is U.S. Senator Bob Casey. He's in Washington, D.C., where there is much going on. Well, Senator, I have two words. I'm going to start with only two words, and I'm reading them to make sure I get them right. Scarlett's sunshine. Tell our viewers why Scarlett's sunshine is so important.
Well, Terry, thanks so much, and I appreciate being on the show. It's named after a little girl who passed away in 2017. She happened to be the daughter of a young woman who worked for us. And when Scarlett passed away, her family grieved in the way that so many families grieve when there's an unexplained or unexpected death of a child or an infant. In her case, she was only 16 months old. And we've heard about this, obviously, for many years, even decades. But what this legislation will do, and it just got through the Senate last week. What this legislation will do is provide more resources and more focus on both investigations of these kinds of deaths, as well as resources so that we can provide more education, more opportunities to prevent it in the first place. And data collection, obviously, is a big part of it.
Now, lots of things in Washington, as well as in Harrisburg and legislatures all over the country, are polarized. How are you doing with bipartisanship on this issue?
Well, when you can get a bill like this through the United States Senate in a unanimous fashion, unanimous consent, UC as they call it, that's pretty rare. But we still have some work to do to get through a House process. But I hope we can get this signed into law as soon as possible. A lot of families need more information,
right,
and I think we need more information in our government to make sure that we can better prevent these kinds of tragedies.
All right, I want to turn to another important issue, and that has to do with COVID-19 Heroes Fund. It's about giving additional money to what I think you all refer to and we all refer to as essential workers. Take it.
Terry, we know that in the midst of this crisis, both the public health crisis, the most challenging crisis in 100 years in terms of public health, and then you've got the economic crisis on top of it. But we know that the people leading the fight, who are on the battlefield in this war, are these frontline workers. They're working in hospitals and nursing homes, and they're in grocery stores, they're sanitation workers, they're police and fire and EMS and first responders. My God, I could spend the next 15 minutes going down the list. Tens and tens of millions of Americans that I think we should show our gratitude to them in a fashion that manifests real gratitude, not just a pat on the back, not just a thank you, but we should provide them a pandemic premium pay on top of their hourly wage. And yes, it will cost a lot of money, but it's the right thing to do for those who are on this battlefield every day, keeping us safe and combating the disease and curing people, but also making sure that it allows us to stay home so that we're not spreading the disease because we didn't social distance. So these frontline workers should be provided a pandemic premium pay.
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I want to talk about something that I know you consider very important, and it has to do with assistance for nursing homes. In Pennsylvania, for example, 67% of the deaths in the state are in nursing homes. And I know that's a big concern to you, and you have some interest in getting some legislation, and we'll get to that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
Well, I'm chatting with U.S. Senator Bob Casey, and we're going to talk about COVID-19 in nursing homes, where a huge proportion of the deaths, both in Pennsylvania and throughout the country, are in nursing homes. And Senator, there's a need for protective equipment, there's a need for more testing, and there may be need to work out some payments to the folks who have put literally their lives on the line every day. Talk about the legislation.
Terry, what we've got to do on nursing homes is have a strategy, an action plan, because we cannot allow another tens of thousands of people to die in nursing homes. Either the resident dies or the worker dies. It's approaching 40,000 people of the 100,000 nationwide who've died. The action plan would be this. First and foremost, we've got to put more dollars into Medicaid for two reasons. Number one is you got to make sure that these nursing homes have the resources they need to combat the problem. One practice that we know works is cohorting, when you separate the nursing home resident with COVID-19 from one that doesn't have it. That costs money. We've got to do that. Number two is those dollars in my bill number 3768, can be used for surge teams. So if a nursing home is having an outbreak and they need more doctors, more nurses, more certified nurses, assistants, we can get them those dollars that they need. We need a strategy to combat this, to make sure that those who gave us life and love, those who contributed so much to our country, are provided quality of care and are protected in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis.
Well, where does the legislation stand? I mean, again, as you know, in Congress and in the Pennsylvania legislature, both of which you know well, it's all a question of bipartisanship, and the big differences ideologically exist. I mean, you would think that would be something that Democrats and Republicans could get behind.
Well, I hope that Republicans in the Senate would join me in providing $20 billion more to help our nursing homes and to protect people. We know these practices work. Why not invest in them? Secondly, in a separate bill, I've asked for dollars as well to make sure that we have more home and community-based services. So you don't have as many people in nursing homes. They can get skilled care in a home or community-based setting, and they can be safe in those settings as well. And obviously, Terry, the workers, we've got to make sure these workers have the personal protective gear that they need and the pay that they need. We have to recruit more people to do this important long-term care work now more than ever.
Yeah. Is that related to the GI Bill for healthcare workers, that, these are the people who've put literally their lives on the line every single day, and whether or not they can get rewarded in some way? What's your sense about that?
We have a bill that's the pandemic responder bill that would focus on the front of the front line. We talked about the front line earlier. Folks at the front of the front line are in the healthcare system. Not only the doctors and the nurses, but all the way down to everyone who makes that hospital run. I believe we should have a GI Bill-like education benefit for those individuals. And I think it should be on top of, in addition to, if that person got a pandemic premium pay through the Heroes Fund. I think this should be an additional benefit, so that individual, just like the GI in the battlefield, couldn't go to college or have higher education while they were fighting the war. While these folks are fighting this war, they might need help with paying off their student loan or to use the dollars for other purposes that helps them and their families. That's what our country should do to give the full measure of our gratitude.
Yeah, as you know, as a student of politics as well as a U.S. Senator, we live in an era of incredible polarization and partisanship. Is there any sense that that's going to get any better anytime soon so that Democrats and Republicans can be more bipartisan in the legislation? Go ahead, sir.
But Terry, we had great consensus and bipartisanship through about mid-April. We had 4 bills adding up to $3 trillion that were unanimous. That has broken down since, and I would hope that Majority Leader McConnell would not have us voting in the month of June like we were in May on nominations. We don't need to be doing nominations now. What we need to do is focus on COVID-19, the public health crisis, and focus on the economic trauma that's flowing in its wake. We need to do both. We don't have time for other activity.
Sure. Look, Senator, I want to thank you for joining me. You be safe and well, and hopefully we'll get you on the program soon. All right, coming up, we're going to talk about the future of public higher education, and we'll do that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
All right, the challenges facing public higher education. Joining me is Dr. Jamie Martin. She's a professor in the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice at Indiana University of Pennsylvania. Jamie, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Terry. It's a pleasure to be with you, even remotely.
Yeah, I understand. We're doing a lot on Zoom and Skype and all these other. All right, look, I want to go to before I get to funding and some of the other problems. You know, you're a professor. You're dealing with students, and you've got counseling with students. I mean, it's hard to even imagine how education is being conducted in this environment when everything is done by remote. Talk about some of the personal challenges that you faced.
You know, it was remarkable, I think. You know, we had spring break. The students were expecting to come back, delayed it here at IUP for a week. And in that week, the faculty just pivoted from the face-to-face approach to moving on to remote instruction using Zoom and other kinds of technology. So I think that's just a credit to the professionalism of our faculty that they were able to make that move. You know, clearly the best option is to be face-to-face with students, but it just wasn't safe. So I have a lot of respect for my colleagues across the 14 and for how well the students adapted to that also.
I'll tell you what's fascinating as someone who taught for more years than I'm willing to admit at this point. It's just not what goes on in the classroom. You interact with students in a variety of ways. You assist them in getting internships. You counsel them when they have problems. I didn't even know how that's quite possible in the same way, given, you know, the remoteness of how education is being delivered.
Again, it was a great challenge. I worked with some students that were hoping to do internships this summer. They were not able to do that because of the challenges and some of the rulings or suggestions by the governor and from the chancellor. We couldn't ensure that they were safe at their given sites. We had students that were going to the Washington Center, and they were trying to find remote internships for them. So this is not at all ideal. But given the circumstances and the safety concerns that we have for our students and our faculty alike, I think it was the best option, and everybody did a wonderful job in trying to assist the students using Zoom technology, conference calls if that was necessary. And again, it's not the same. We had counseling services available remotely for students. So we did our best, set up emergency funding for them if they had financial issues related to it. So I think we did the best job we possibly could.
Yeah. I want to get to the funding of the public universities, but before I do that, one quick question has to do with the future. And colleges, some are saying, yep, we're coming back, we're in the classroom. Some are saying, no, it's going to be done remotely. Some say we'll make the decision later. What's going on with the public universities, the 14 publicly owned universities in the state?
I think at this point, they're still in a holding pattern, although at IUP, they announced that we'll be back face-to-face in the fall. I think there are so many questions. I have questions if we come back face-to-face about how safe are the residence halls? Are students going to be able to physically distance in those locations? What about dining facilities or gym facilities, other services? Will it be athletics? And in the classroom, I don't know how we'll be able to actually sanitize those rooms between classes where there's a 15-minute period and you have all kinds of touch points. So a lot of unanswered questions. As a mom, I want to make sure our students are safe. And so whatever that looks like in the fall, until we know more about this disease and more about treatments or potential vaccines, I just think there are so many unknowns. So we don't have an overarching strategy across the 14. I think people take this summer to get a handle on what's happening with the virus. But from my perspective, we want everybody to be safe. We have faculty with underlying health conditions, students with underlying health conditions. So I think it's difficult to know right now until we know a little bit more about what's happening this summer with the curve of the virus. All
right, let's turn to funding. As you know, there's a bill moving through the legislature that would fund the public schools, public colleges for a year. You'll have some consistency, but the question is, there's been a funding shortfall now for several years. So what's your expectation about funding for the 14 publicly owned universities in the state?
Well, we were thankful that we were flat funded. It could have been much worse given the concerns and the issues facing Pennsylvania in terms of tax revenues and all of those things. So we were grateful for that. But having said that, it doesn't seem as if there's an overarching strategy in Pennsylvania for where higher education fits in and the purpose for that. And the funding has led to unbelievable consequences for universities and for our students. And so we're, 47th, 48th, 50th in the nation in how we fund public higher education. We're some of the costliest public education universities in the nation. I just read recently that it's cheaper for a student to go to Purdue or Iowa than it would be to any of our 14, and that's directly linked to the funding or lack thereof. So I'm hoping that we see this as an importance that deserves additional funding. It's more critical now that we have students who are able to go out into the workforce in the Commonwealth. We're seeing that currently play out where individuals who have certain kinds of education can work remotely, where we saw service industries and others get hit so hard in the pandemic.
All right. Look, I want to thank you. Again, I want to point out, President-elect of APSCUF, you represent the faculty and other personnel in the public universities. Please stay safe. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And as always, stay well.